I'm Garry Adelman. I am a licensed battlefield guide here. I'm the Director of History and Education at the Civil War Trust, and I'm the Vice President and founder of the Center for Civil War Photography. So I love everything we are talking about today. And with that, let's just get to it. I don't think you need your 3D glasses at the beginning. I thought one of the things I would do is try to the degree possible to learn about Gettysburg and the photography and the battle and battlefield using as many panoramas as we could, because we do have panoramas and we're lucky. Gettysburg was, sort of covered well by the initial photographers, and there were about 9 of them that came in the year of the battle. There's no other battlefield that is remotely that well covered. And this guy over here, Matthew Brady, standing on a rail over there, his firm recorded a 2-plate panorama here on the first day's field. This is where most people start their tour as they get out on the battlefield. This, quarry pond is still there. There's a fence there in the same place today. These trees, you can very well see them, and Willoughby's Run would be off in the distance. So even looking at these, photos can help us understand the battlefield a little bit better, because we know at least what this part of the battlefield looked like indisputably in 1863. Here we are after the fighting, kind of in the initial first day's field, where you're going to have some Confederates pushing against the Union Iron Brigade and others. We have a post-war picture here taken along the Mummersburg Road. This is looking up toward what you all know as the Peace Light Memorial, and you can see, Oak Hill and Oak Ridge over here. In other words, as after a lull in the battle on July 1st, 1863, the Confederates arrived with their largest division, Robert Rhodes's division, 5 brigades, and I'm not even going to bother keep picking those up because it's going to keep happening. They're going to arrive on this hill over here, and eventually there will be intense fighting between them and Robinson's division, who is actually using this very slope to reinforce themselves, a picture most of you probably haven't seen before. And of course, a more famous one. After the Oak Hill position fell, you were going to have the Confederates push the Union off of Seminary Ridge. This photo was taken right near what we call Lee's headquarters, looking toward the town of Gettysburg. An incredible picture that lets you see so much. Here's the old dorm of Gettysburg College there. This is the Sheeds house. Right now there's about 5 houses between the camera and here, but that house is still there today. You can see Culp's Hill and East Cemetery Hill, including the mammoth tree on there. Some of you with good eyes might be able to catch an encampment of some militia, Pennsylvania militia there, because this is taken in mid-July 1863, and all sorts of other great details. You can see a grave or two right over here, the unfinished railroad bed here. It's a great photo, okay? And you can even zoom into this. This isn't even a glass plate negative that I'll talk about soon. This is a print, a high-quality print. And in this print, you can now see some of the things I talked about better. The Adams County Courthouse, Culp's Hill really well, the mammoth tree. You can even maybe spot the gatehouse of Evergreen Cemetery in profile from the side. So I would encourage you to download this picture from the National Archives and check this thing out as much as you can. I'll also point out, I think I'm going to zoom in on this house right here. After I do some other stuff. So later I'll zoom in on this house here. Now I'm going to zoom in right over here. And you can see that militia encampment, and I'll show you that from a different angle later. Here's the 90-foot poplar tree, shows up in the back of all sorts of famous photos and whatnot. And again, there is the Evergreen Gatehouse. Now, some of you, I know there's some real Gettysburg nerds in the room, and some of you maybe less so. So if you want to hit me, don't understand something, break in if you can, and I'll be glad to answer your questions if possible. Now, I work for the Civil War Trust full-time. We're a land preservation organization. I won't dwell on that too much, but it is important to note, because I know there's a lot of Civil War Trust members here, that slowly but surely all these little blue parcels we've been adding to the Gettysburg battlefield on East Cavalry Field, along the Hanover Pike, down near Little Round Top, on South Cavalry Field, and elsewhere. So we've really been making a lot of progress here. And in fact, we've saved about 1/10 of the land that has ever been preserved at Gettysburg with the help of our members. But by far, the most high-profile deal we've ever done was just in the last year or two at Lee's headquarters here in the yellow. Now, the Trust doesn't save headquarters, that is, unless there is fighting there. And there's plenty of fighting right around Lee's headquarters. Not only are the Union positioned there, and it's the last place to fall on the first day, but later the Confederates are going to take position and put up artillery there and also make Lee's headquarters in the same location. Now, this was kind of our vision for what the place would look like. Many of you remember the Quality Inn surrounding it. I think many of you know also it's not there anymore. This was our artist rendering, and it's not too far, actually, from what it looks like now. Here's our time-lapse. Right across the street, I have a time-lapse camera in the James Thompson house. Has been getting it so you can really see that, first, of course, we got rid of hotel buildings. Eventually, we were able to restore this foundation of the Dustman Barn, and then we were able to put a new roof on and get rid of the dormers. In the top of Lee's headquarters, we've remove the berm around here, which will eventually allow us to restore my favorite feature, the doghouse that we know was there in 1863. Just wait. I mean, this is a huge contract with this, guy who worked on the house. And I said, before we awarded, I said, I want the doghouse for free. And he said, and he actually said, I'm sorry, I don't have a picture of it here. I might later, but he said, okay, but what's the dog's name? I said, I don't know. He's like, well, can we name the dog Austin? Because the company's name is Mark Austin. So we have named General Lee's headquarters owner, Mrs. Thompson's dog, Austin, officially. Within 2 months, you will be able to walk on an interpretive trail here, from this parking area and see something similar to this. The trees won't go until next year, but we'll get the fences in according to the best maps we have. The historic grade is almost restored as it is, so I hope you enjoy when you go by there. Before we tore down the hotel and restaurant buildings, I went on the roof of the Appalachian Brewing Company, which is the approximate location of the Henry Casper Dustman house. And from that house was recorded this picture I was showing you before. So, I'll even point out that here's the old dorm from Gettysburg College, and there's the old dorm for Gettysburg College. And you can even see these two bumps over here very clearly visible in the distance here. So it's cool stuff. Now, as we took them down, I got to learn how to fly the Civil War Trust's drone, which I purchased with my budget there. So while I didn't get it perfectly, I was able to get the drone up above the Casper Henry Dustman house and able to get over these houses. And again, I mean, look at these hills right here, and you can see them in the distance, Culp's Hill, and I guess it's Wolf Hill in the distance, and Old Dorm is a little bit blocked here. But we have all sorts of fun stuff we can do now with drones and otherwise. So I hope you enjoy what we're doing there. And long last, is the zoom in I wanted to show you on that one house before. You can see some steps going up here. And what's interesting is that we're at the Gettysburg Heritage Center, and anyone who's gone into the main exhibits over there sees that they have this house in the exhibit where you can go into the cellar and experience what it was like for somebody in a cellar. In that case, in John Burns's cellar. This is John Burns's house blown up right there, right at the end of the Chambersburg Pike where it curves to go into town. Now, the reason we can blow up on these photos, whether they're prints made from glass plate negatives or from the negatives themselves, is that Civil War negatives are huge. They're 4 by 10 inches, 7 by 9 inches, 8 by 10 inches, 25 to 50 times larger than the 35 millimeter negatives that most of us, at least in this room, grew up with, okay? And unlike those sort of grainy 35 millimeter negatives, and unlike even the best digital cameras that even Pat Rich has, and that says a lot, it cannot approach the resolution on a Civil War glass plate negative from 150 plus years ago. That is because there are no pixels, there is no grain, it's a chemical sheet. And theoretically, you can enlarge these things to the molecular level. I mean, it's a chemical, so there is a lot to blow up. For example, here's what you call a John Henry, a contraband soldier helping out in camp around Brandy Station. And from what I can tell, Civil War pictures are usually taken further back than you expect them to. So let's say you're 15 or 20 feet away from this guy, right? Now, if you zoom in on his hands from 15 or 20 feet away in that negative, I mean, if his palms were up, you could read his fingerprints. Okay, I mean, do that. Challenge Pat Rich to do that with her thing. I mean, look at this. And again, when you use the high-resolution scans at the Library of Congress and zoom in, you can learn all sorts of great stuff and just see things that are just cool. So back to our guy, John Burns. Here's that house we were talking about. Here he is sitting. He's the hero of Gettysburg. He went out from his house sick and tired of hearing the firing going on near his house. Said he lost his cow after he got captured. But, the soldiers laughed at him till he fought alongside them quite respectably, got wounded, by the Southerners and then captured by them. And he said, I lost my cow. I'm just an old man. He had buried his ammunition and thrown his gun away. And they either didn't see him as a threat or believed him. And he went on to become the hero of Gettysburg, the only man to come out and defend the town. So famous did he become, of course, at the age of 70, that Lincoln heard of him down in Washington, wanted to meet him, and did when he came to deliver his Gettysburg address. And John Burns fell asleep next to Lincoln at a political rally in town at the Presbyterian Church. Pretty cool. Now, in zooming into things, you can see his old supposedly War of 1812 flintlock musket. You could at least inspect it to see if he's telling the truth or not. And you can zoom in so far that you can pick out flies on John Burns, okay? Here are 4 of them, okay? Zooming in and look, I mean, if you don't believe me, that's a fly, okay? Now, what you got to know here is that, these exposures could take, 3, 4, 10 seconds, depending. So these are just the flies that happen to stay still long enough. Now, I'm not going to question John Burns' hygiene. His pants are all ripped and everything like that. I would imagine maybe he's not the most cleanly dude. I mean, back then, 72, unlike today, back then, 70 was like old, so he was probably starting to not care anymore. I mean, I can't really say, but...
Did you say this was after he fought?
Yes, those are his crutches. You could see over there. So he is recovering here about 2 weeks after he fought in the Battle of Gettysburg. Good question, okay? So here he is, and what I would say is, it'd be easy to cast dispersion on him because there's flies all over him, but from what I understand, right after the battle, the flies weren't that bad. But with all the thousands of dead horses and, thousands of dead soldiers, apparently there are so many larvae, somewhat, or maggots and whatnot in these bodies that hundreds of thousands of flies could come out of a single horse alone, okay? So it was said when you came to Gettysburg that some people, they mentioned that they saw like a black fence post, and then they realized it wasn't painted black, it was just that covered with flies. So there are flies everywhere. So I gave this program, or I showed this photo in June, actually, and said to my friend John Richter, who had pointed out that fly to me, and I think that fly, or something like that, and I said, well, I found 2 more. And he didn't like that. So he found 17 flies in this one picture. And by the way, I'm saying I know this because there is another picture taken of John Burns sitting there. It's almost the same. It's a little bit different, and you can tell which black spots are in one and not in the other. Now, we have some time on our hands when we're doing stuff like this, but man, that's cool. And it actually speaks to the aftermath of the battle about how many flies were actually here. So count them up if you'd like. Now, I had shown you before the militia encampment and the giant poplar tree all the way from Seminary Ridge, miles away from here, which you just can't quite see over here. But it's out that way. And this is Oak Ridge right over there. Yeah, Oak Ridge and Oak Hill. So I like the idea that you can, in a way, fly around 1863 Gettysburg using these big panoramas, because now we're looking back towards some of the other same stuff we saw, including the Adams County Courthouse, some of the same buildings if you really zoom in, the militia encampment, this thing. You could zoom in on this stuff and see all sorts of cool stuff, probably a soldier's grave surrounded by some fence rails. You can barely see it, but along the Baltimore Pike, I mean, many of you, all of you have probably driven on this road before, you can see how they extended this stone wall to try to protect, in case Confederates were going to try roaring up there and whatnot. So, I mean, the immediacy of battle is still very evident. If you look inside the militia encampment, you can see soldiers hanging out in it. This is a group that kind of helped after the battle. They weren't actually in the battle, so they encamped there afterward to help with some of the operations. Now, on the first day, of course, the Union retreated back to right where this last photo, the previous photo was taken, right to East Cemetery Hill, and they took up Culp's Hill, and I think extended their lines into the shape of a fish hook, where they're not only on Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, but actually going down Cemetery Ridge and anchoring themselves, supposedly, here at Little Round Top on the left, Big Round Top on the right, in a photo you never see, because this is a rare photo. It's not at the Library of Congress or the National Archive, taken by the Weavers in August of 1863, just a month after the Battle of Gettysburg. Again, a 2-plate panorama. You could see a guy posing there, to help with size, but basically these rocks, we know where this rock is. It's right along the Wheatfield Road today. Okay, so you can sit on this rock where you incline to, and you can zoom into this print and see the Warren Rock and the Signal Rock, these rocks on top of Little Round Top we know so well and whatnot. So really cool stuff. As I think most of you know, the Confederates, especially their right flank, as part of a much larger attack of 2.5 divisions, it's going to take place on the south end of the battlefield. The right part will crest Big Round Top, come down the other side, and there's going to be fighting on the far side of Little Round Top. No actual fighting to speak of on this side of Little Round Top. Now, after the Confederates captured Devil's Den, it changed hands 3 times. This would have been their view, coming in through Devil's Den. Again, another Alexander Gardner 2-plate panorama in which you can see some of the rocks behind which the 4th Maine would have hid in the fight for Devil's Den, and then members of the 44th Alabama, maybe some members of the 2nd Georgia, maybe the 17th Georgia. We don't know for sure, but all of these rocks are here, except these, because the road runs right here. But these guys just sit right there. A great view of what they would have been able to see on Little Round Top from this position. Zooming in, like right down here, I spotted a grave a couple of years ago. I mean, clearly, this is disturbed earth. I can't quite tell if this is, but again, I don't know who it is, but luckily, You know, we can look at the Elliott burial map that was made within a year of the battle, and it has little hash marks for wherever every soldier was. I mean, I think this is the type of stuff we have to do, you know, to try to identify at least whose grave this is. You know, there's a great chance that this guy, he's probably a Union soldier. I think that's a pretty good chance, although he's in front of the Union line, so maybe he's not. Good chance he was moved to a Union or Confederate cemetery, and there's a really good chance he was unidentified at that point. I mean, I don't really see a headboard here, which would be the main hope. As you know, there's about 3,500 soldiers from Gettysburg buried in the National Cemetery, of which 1,670 or so are either totally or largely unknown. So I think little exercises like this where we can even narrow it down to, okay, it's one of these 60 people or one of these 4 people, I think that's kind of what we owe the soldiers who fought here. You can zoom in and see all sorts of other cool things. This is the now famous, or famous if you're a big enough nerd, Trough Rock, not far from Devil's Den. And this is what we call the Smiley Rock, or good thing this isn't being filmed, the Smartass Rock. See how it's always like smirking at you right there? And less funny is the body of the Confederate soldier laying right next to it, and that's Plum Run right there. Okay, William Fresnito identifies and talks about all this in his masterpiece, Early Photography at Gettysburg. Now, the fighting isn't only at Devil's Den and Little Round Top, of course. In fact, it's bloodiest and larger at a lot of other places, the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, and here at the Rose Farm, which nobody really knew the severity of the fight here. That is until William Fresnito discovered that the largest group of dead soldiers ever recorded on any battlefield were recorded on the Rose Farm. And man, you can go right back to these places and see them and whatnot. This rock is still there, that rock is still there, the same cracks and the same boulders. And of course, this guy with the bent knee, probably a man from Georgia or South Carolina, I think Georgia, you know, was the key to lining up the various views of these bodies. There's a total of 14 negatives taken on the Rose Farm, all of which show some of the human carnage of the Battle of Gettysburg. If you go into the back of that photo, I'll back up right here. What just looks like a distance tree line is actually the earliest photo of the Peach Orchard. Which is pretty cool. I mean, that's all we can see, but there's some sort of a tall tree in the middle of the Peach Orchard. You know, if you want to understand where Dan Sickles was we have no early photo of the Peach Orchard. This is the best we can do. Now, they're not just fighting on the Union left, of course, they're fighting closer to the Union right at East Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. And another panorama helps us see that a little bit better, probably taken by Matthew Brady, July 1863, showing the German Reformed Church, showing one of those distinctive trees that you could actually see in the Seminary Ridge pano. Some guys posing here, and the big light blue water tower that so many guides use to point out East Cemetery Hill is right there. Okay, so in other words, this is where the park's land ends right now. This is where the big water tower is. This is woods. But for those of you who know, if you ever walk down Wainwright Avenue and come up along this next wall, that's actually where the Union position was. And there are markers to the units that were positioned over here, 11th Corps units that were spread out in some cases 6 feet apart as the Southerners attacked from right off in the distance here, some of whom also swung out. This is Louisianians and North Carolinians swinging out, capturing the crest of East Cemetery Hill for a time. But that's really the story of Gettysburg. The Union managed to send 2 brigades over, push the Confederates back, and where are the Confederate reinforcements? They're just not around. That's the story of Gettysburg. Wherever the Southerners were most successful, the Yankees marshaled stronger forces and pushed them right on back. And that's what happened on East Cemetery Hill. There's a reason for this. The Union Army is larger, and they are on a more compact interior line, about 3+ miles long. The Southern line is 6 miles long, and there are fewer of them. So obviously, there's going to be fewer reinforcements to go around where they were needed. They're also going to fight at Culp's Hill. You know, it's not just early photos we have that we need to understand 1863. We have sketch artists here, namely Alfred Wad and also Edwin Forbes, who were right on the scene before the photographers, who didn't need clunky darkroom wagons or anything like that. Rather, all they needed was a pad and a pencil and I guess a knife to sharpen that pencil. And this is an incredible view that we would never have any sort of photo of because of where it's taken. This is the base of Culp's Hill from the Confederate side. Okay, so he depicts Confederates quite rightly behind what we call the sharpshooter's boulder. That boulder's there. I was there today. Looking up toward the Union line, stacked with men and with distinctive boulders over here that you can visit today as well. An incredible thing, and what these sketches did, and there's notes on them so they would remember it and so that they could take these things later and improve them into actual paintings. So even if you see a post-war painting, sometimes these things are based upon original sketches that were made within days of the battle. This was supposedly sketched on July 4th 1863. It's just incredible. There are some differences between the two. I mean, once you have the time to sketch, to really do things in, you're going to, make things look prettier and whatnot. And I'll point out a couple of them, I think. You can see in the distance the very impressive Union breastworks. Man, they look like they're about chin high. It's like Spotsylvania or something when you start looking at it. But they did have impressive breastworks there. We have pictures of them with the Union flag going over it. I will say that that's what the original looked like, so you can compare the two. So he obviously improved it, but in terms of essentials, the fact that there's a rock there, and a rock there, it's pretty good. In the original too, it says sharpshooter in tree, which is really cool. I mean, if you go back to the original, he is way up there. That's a brave or stupid guy. I mean, if he gets hit once, he is done. And it's interesting that that one did not make it into the final version, if I may. He's just not up there anymore. So he chose to leave that part out. So in any case, what we don't have is a whole lot of pictures of the next day of battle. You know that the Confederates did really well in some areas, but they really failed eventually on the Union left. They failed on the Union right. Lee says in his perfect Virginia accent, he must be weak in the center. And he is going to, that was supposed to be a joke. Like, I can't speak Southern, so that's as close as I can come. Okay. So this is the closest thing we really have to a photo showing the field of Pickett's charge. And although it's not a panorama, it sort of serves as one because it's so high up and shows so much cool stuff. This is Little Round Top with this rock, unfortunately blocking all sorts of stuff. We'd be able to see the J. Weichert Farm, the Wheatfield Road better and everything. But he chose, I don't know why Brady chose to put that rock in the foreground. But nonetheless, we can see all sorts of stuff when we zoom in. Not only can you see the field of Pickett's charge, that's what this is. This is Ziegler's Grove, which they're now restoring now, and the woods behind Evergreen Cemetery, some of which are still there now. But you can zoom in and see the earliest known photo of the Cadore Farm. A lot of people say, this is on the Emmitsburg Road. People say, oh, there is no early photo of the Cadore Farm. Wrong. If you look on the left side of the negative and just blow it up, it's not great, but you can see what shape the house is. You can see what the outbuilding and the barn look like. So again, I think we should use these photos to better understand the battlefield. And some people that you really think should use it. These photos. People restoring the battlefield, and things like that should really use these photos more. Here's another shot from there, just a blow-up showing the George Weichert Farm, and just about my favorite thing, wagon tracks from the recent battle. I mean, these guys, there aren't roads through the battlefield like there are now. There is the Wheatfield Road, which you see here, but these guys are busting through that wall, and who knows what they're moving, whether it be artillery or wagons and whatnot, and there are their tracks. And here, for years as a battlefield guide, for more than a decade, I would drive people down the Wheatfield Road and point out the hog-tight and cow-high fence right there. That is a stone fence with a post and rail fence on top of it, tight enough for your cattle, tall enough for your, tight enough for your pigs, tall enough for your cattle. Well, you blow this up and you see that this is clearly a stone wall. And in this case, the National Park Service, either using maps or this, realized that there shouldn't have been a rail fence on it and removed the rail fence, for which I compliment them. That's great. And like I said, you can see the field of Pickett's charge. Here's looking over the boulder. This is the field across which the North Carolinians and the Virginians, Tennessee, Alabama, anyone else I forgot, is going up. And you can actually see right there is the actual clump of trees, the earliest view of the high water mark, the clump of trees. Incredibly, no 1863, 64, 65, 66, all the way to 1874 photographers actually recorded a remotely close-up view of the clump of trees. And you can also see Meade's headquarters, which is right here, and the Leicester barn here. So, as well as, by the way, what is Evergreen Cemetery and the National Cemetery, which was actually had trees all over it. And they had to remove trees in order to bury the bodies in the National Cemetery. Speaking of the cemetery itself, after the battle is over, of course, you are going to have several photographers actually covering the Gettysburg Address. Nobody knew how long Abraham Lincoln would speak or anything like that, but we have a photographer in the window over there. We have one here, Alexander Gardner. He's up on a platform. You can see he's a little bit higher, and all sorts of other stuff. And of course, you're familiar. You can zoom into this photo like others. Again, that's the one where you can see the photographer's camera right in the window. But look at this. These are the lunettes from the battle from a few months earlier. People are watching the Gettysburg Address from the artillery lunettes. Those are the small half-moon-shaped mounds that are on East Cemetery Hill that protect cannons. And there they are watching the address from there. I think in one of the versions you can see someone up in this tree watching and whatnot. Very cool. And of course in this one, according to some people, you can see Abraham Lincoln. According to other people, you can see Abraham Lincoln elsewhere. And according to some people, you can see Abraham Lincoln right... God, this is really a tough blow-up, but right there. I'm sure that looks just like him. Okay? And this is the phenomenon many of you have heard me talk about before, and that's this. Anyone with a top hat is Abraham Lincoln. It drives me crazy. Of course, we know that this is Lincoln, and he's not wearing a top hat, but I mean, if you go on eBay, still to this day, anybody with a top hat, that photo could have been taken in 1940, and it's Abraham Lincoln. Pay me $10,000 because it's Lincoln. I mean, you know, here's some guys at Fort Sumter at the beginning of the war. I'm sure Abraham Lincoln must have been at Fort Sumter at the beginning of the war because, you know, I mean, they're all Lincoln. This guy's hat isn't quite tall enough, so I don't think he's Lincoln. But the other three obviously are. So there's just Lincolns running all over the place. You know, in fact, Teddy Roosevelt is also definitely Lincoln because he has a high hat. That's all you need. Now, in 1865, cameramen came back to East Cemetery Hill and the National Cemetery as well. You can still see that the huge 90-foot poplar. There's a different sort of a setup here than the militia encampment that had been here a couple of years earlier. These are the temporary headboards of the National Cemetery before they had the nice flat graves that so many of us are used to. They actually had temporary headboards for a while, and the idea that the actual person is under each of those. I mean, at Antietam, we know it not to be true. I'm not sure if we know for sure that it's true that each soldier is actually under the stone that represents him. Pretty tough to know. And of course, you can see. What's that?
What building is that?
Hold on, did you just call me Tim?
No.
I think I just heard you call me Tim. He called me Tim? I'm not going to answer your question. I think you've even done it before. We don't even look alike. In any case, this is the building that is still there today. It is the National Cemetery Gatehouse, not the Evergreen Gatehouse, but the Gatehouse, but it looks nothing like that anymore. It's been heavily refurbished. And once in a while there's parties in there, but you're not invited. I've only been in there once even. But these two gates are still there with eagles on top of them and everything. You can, you know, and if you're a big enough loser, there's a stone wall back there. You can line up the actual stuff. I mean, these photos are great for that. And oh, here they are. Here's the building that I won't talk about anymore. And then the, you know, these really cool gates. And many of you have walked through these before, I am certain. Scanning more to the right, look at this artillery battery set up here. This is 1865. They're there in association with the dedication of the cornerstone for the Soldiers' National Monument. It was a huge event in 1865. George Gordon Meade is there. I think there's a vice president there. Mary Lincoln was supposed to be there, but I don't think she is, and she's not doing that well. But it's a big deal. There's an artillery battery, and a cavalry detachment, and there's a whole other Union regiment, the 50th Pennsylvania there. Again, people hanging out among the lunettes. And by this time, even by 1865, East Cemetery Hill was already preserved as a battlefield park. By far, the first Civil War park of all was this parcel of land right along the Baltimore Pike called East of Cemetery Hill, preserved in August of 1863. It is the first battlefield park, and it all started right here. Chickamauga likes to say they're the first National Military Park. They are, but that's 1890. Gettysburg already had hundreds of acres preserved long before the government ever came in. Now, you're going to want your 3D glasses here. What do you know? Mine are on the ground. So, you know, I have just kind of gone through Gettysburg, you know, using panoramas and everything like that. But, you know, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit here. Is anybody else missing a pair? Sorry, Lee. Anyone else? Okay, good. So I'm going to suggest not only in this 3D stuff, but you all have been on battlefield tours before. And, you know, you go out to a place and something's going on a battlefield. You know, you can't explain it, but somebody might tell you something about it. They might, like, read from an account, okay, and they might tell you, this is what happened here. And you start to say, yeah, that's pretty interesting, you know. And then they point at things, because that's what battlefield guides do, and you understand it a little bit more. And maybe they even take a photo of there and show you the place you are. This is the Clover Hill Tavern, actually, at Appomattox Courthouse. Still there, great state of preservation. And, you know, I suggest that when this happens, and I do this, I've done this with thousands of people, do a then and now thing out on a battlefield. I suggest what you're having, that what you express as cool or wow, that's actually a four-dimensional experience, okay? And I'm not joking about this. I'm perfectly serious. And that's a rare event, so enjoy it. You know, when you go out to this place at Antietam and you stand not far from the visitor center, and this is just an incredible photo of an artillery battery that just fought, Knapp's battery, they fought here too, but they had just fought at Antietam, a dead horse on the left, you know, an American flag, a burial detail working in the background right there, and you go back to that same place. Okay? And you know something is going on there, and that's what I suggest the fourth dimension is. Now, what the fourth dimension is not is what the media and parks love to tell you it is. Ooh, they're going to put a buttery popcorn smell into there. They're going to spray water on you or vibrate your seat. Yeah, a vibrating seat is such a new dimension. But yeah, we all buy that that's the fourth dimension. They vibrate your seat or spray something on you. Suddenly it's dimensional. No, look it up. Time is the fourth dimension, and I think when you take your natural 3D vision and add a time element to it there, the little shiver you might get or something like that is the fourth dimension. And with that, I think we have an unparalleled opportunity with Civil War photos that we just don't have any other way, because most Civil War photos, the outdoor, the documentary ones, of the maybe 10,000 we think were taken, at least 7,000 of them are taken in 3D. They weren't just taken in 3D, they were taken as if this is the only way you'd ever see them. That's why these Confederate-clad kids and the other children are in this, seemingly facing off against Union cavalry at Sudley Springs Ford along Cat Harpin Run near Bull Run. You know, that is why this photo is taken so low to the ground, so it will increase the depth of this family trying to get ready for a picture, actually. They're trying to get the kid calm. I don't know if you've ever seen the final version of this, a very famous photo where she's looking at the camera and they've calmed the kid, they bring a dog in, and it's a great photo, but they had to take 3 tries. And that's why, you know, they always tried to have a foreground and a middle ground and a background. This, the Thomas Viaduct, still the largest stone bridge, railroad bridge ever built on a curve in the world. The thing is huge. Anyone ever been there before? Where's Barry? Yeah. Yeah. And now they have it blocked off. It used to be able to walk up, which I always questioned. I mean, it was really dangerous, but really cool stuff. And this early war shot taken at Relay, Maryland, near BWI can help show that. You know, and again, imagine this photo not in 3D, not nearly as good, showing these guys clowning around in camp before the Civil War really got going. They're up there, they're on their great adventure. Fort Sumter's behind them, but there hasn't been a land battle yet, so they're just taking pictures of whatever they could. And by war's end, though, they could get truly meaningful 3D photographs. And this might be one of the best of the entire war. The ruins of Richmond back there, of some of the mills, and, you know, freed people that had just been freed weeks or maybe just a couple of months earlier, standing in front of the ruins of the Confederate capital city. Just in itself a very meaningful photo, and a good one to boot. And again, you can use this 3D technique at Gettysburg like crazy. And I'm going to go through the battle again because there's no such thing as doing this too many times. The battle starts here along the banks of Willoughby's Run. There are 3 different photos of this guy standing near that rock, and yet we cannot find it. Here is that same quarry pond, but now in 3D, showing the very woods and just about the exact location where John Burns is known to have fought, along with some Wisconsin men of the Iron Brigade, right inside McPherson's Woods or Herbst Woods or Reynolds Woods. Of course, not far from there is where General Reynolds is actually killed, shot through the back of his neck, and they carved an R into this tree and about 6 other trees. So there's 6 different trees where Reynolds was actually killed. It's very frustrating. But this is about the earliest R carved into any of the trees. And there happens to be a temporary headboard of a man from the 24th Michigan fighting in here. So this one looks out toward like the stoplight where you cross on Reynolds Avenue and cross the Chambersburg Pike. A 3D picture that almost hurts your eyes a little bit. Sometimes they got a little bit too close to the stuff in the foreground, but a beautiful photo that shows the Oak Ridge Railroad cut. This is the land the Civil War Trust just bought next to Lee's headquarters, and this is where Hupp's battery was. And there might be a few of you who have bushwhacked and gone to the top of things. I know the Gettysburg Daily, who's covering this event, did that not long ago. Again, there's a fence all the way across it because it was not an active railroad yet. They had the bed, but they did not have any iron or any ties in there. And maybe just one of the best 3D photos of Gettysburg, too. Again, now you know why this fence is here and why this assistant is right in the foreground there, gazing toward the Lutheran Seminary. Had he been here on the afternoon of July 1st, the Union line would have been up top here. You'd eventually see Union soldiers streaming back across here as South Carolinians came around the building, Abner Perrin's men, and coming down this slope right over here. And you can line up this view to a degree still to this day. And of course, also taken from the Civil War Trust property across the street from Lee's headquarters, and with the mammoth tree barely visible in the background, probably the most famous photo of the Civil War, at least in the top 5. I'd love to hear at the end, you know, what some of your theories are for the most iconic or the most famous or the coolest photo of the Civil War. But man, you can go right to the spot today, although there's a stone wall there instead of this, you know, sort of rail barricade. We have no idea who they are, but every couple of years somebody comes up with an impossible statement about who they are. The last one, which the U.S. Postal Service actually believed, was that, you know, a guy said, "Those are my, you know, ancestors, and I know them, but, the guy provided the names. One of them was killed like 6 months before, and then the two that were left were father and son, and they're just, I'm sorry, they're just not that different in age, even if they were having kids young back then. And I thought I want to show you John Burns here in 3D. I'll bet you he probably looks taller than you might have expected. When somebody actually has depth, they can come to life a little bit. Again, same crutches. This is the different shot. You see, he's not covered in flies on this one. And here he is with his wife, who actually was helpful in his recovery. And as he was recovering, he crawled across the field to the Riggs house. This is across from Lee's headquarters, laid on the cellar door and called to people at the Thompson house at Lee's headquarters saying, help me and get my wife. And eventually he made it back to his house. They have some pretty cool window coverings, by the way. And not only that, this is the scene you walk through at the Heritage Center. So if you haven't done it, I encourage it. It's a pretty cool little cellar experience. But if you look over here, you can see very clearly Matthew Brady, who just loved being in his photos. This is his way of almost saying, this is my photo. And he's the only Civil War photographer to appear in his own photos in every year of the Civil War that I know of. The fact is, we don't know the identification of what a lot of these guys look like. And that's Brady himself in 3D. He didn't sit for the camera too much in his studio, but this might be the clearest, crispest one. Look at that facial hair, man. That just pops out at you. And Robert E. Lee, there are no known 3D photos of Robert E. Lee, but sometimes when they took these things, cartes de visite, he was so famous they took 4 at a time. Well, if they took them like this, all you need is 2 photos an eye width apart in order to see something in 3D. So we're able to have a post-war view of Robert E. Lee, at least, and see, at least in old age, his barrel chest that so many people wrote about, among other things. And here's his headquarters at Gettysburg. And we know he was in the house. We don't know if he did everything in the house. We don't know where his tent was, everything like that. And I'm sorry, you can't see the doghouse over here, but I was dying to show you. It is over here. And here it is. If you go there and line up this photo, you can see that rock and that rock and that rock. Each one is still in the exact same spot, which is incredible, even for a well-preserved building, especially one that was burned to its shell, in the 1800s. Looking back from Seminary Ridge back through town on a road that isn't even there anymore. This is not Middle Street. This is like this sort of center road that's not even there anymore, but just a cool shot of what the Union would have seen retreating back into the town of Gettysburg. And a great photo, again, fence rail in the foreground, soldier between the evergreen cemetery, and just a beautiful, crisp Brady view. Matthew Brady was a master of his art, and he actually either employed or taught every single famous Civil War photographer. Now, it's thought that he took all the photos of the Civil War. People used to say that. And then we realized he didn't, and he actually had failing eyesight, so people started saying Brady didn't take any photos of the Civil War. And like most things, it's probably somewhere in the middle. But he was a master of his craft. His stuff is really clear. He also enjoyed better atmospheric conditions than some of the other photographers, having come here after the rains had already left. And as you went down, I'm going in the same order, over to Little Round Top. Here's Matthew Brady gazing toward Little Round Top. Again, right along the Wheatfield Road, you can line some of these rocks up to this day. And another beautiful 3D photo of not only Little Round Top, but you can see Big Round Top sneaking in on the right there. And of course, the human carnage, which I'm not done talking about. And I don't do this for sensationalistic reasons, and this one might hurt your eyes a little bit, I'm sorry. But the photographers were very careful to record this stuff. People before the Civil War had no idea what a battlefield looked like. They heard somebody come home from it, and of course the people, if they were willing to talk about it, didn't tell a story like this. They had this picture that, when my loved one went to battle, if he did fall, it would be on top of a parapet with a American flag draped across his breast and maybe a little trickle of blood running from his mouth. No! In fact, when these photos were first seen in New York and Washington at Matthew Brady and other studios, they shocked the nation. Suddenly, they are bloated, far from home, laying out in the elements. It is the antithesis of 19th century glory. Some of them have been, disemboweled, actually, either by artillery or by horses. Here you can see a grave over there, and you can see some dead Confederates. We don't even know where this one was taken. But I want to back up on this one here so we can understand what we're looking at here. This is a photo that we made as a contrivance. All you need are two pictures an eye width apart to make a 3D photo. You could do it with your iPhone right now. Take a picture, take another one a little over, and then use red and blue, whatever color glasses you have, and make it into 3D. We made this photo from something like this, something that was taken on 2 sides, and most of you remember these. You had these little stereo viewers in your parlor. These viewers actually were actually purchased. This company, Anthony Company, was actually purchased by Viewmaster. So Viewmaster was actually followed these stereo views. This stereo view came from a glass plate. Okay, this glass plate is basically a glass plate negative with a black background behind it, which really makes it an ambrotype. If you take away the black background, it looks like that. So that's an actual glass plate negative. It's these things that you can scan in such high resolution and get really well. So I just wanted to back up on how we came to the 3D photos I'm showing you. They were recorded as if that's the only way we'd ever see them. Now, this thing about the dead soldiers, I just want to point out, I can't stress enough how important this was, how revolutionary this was. In fact, I'm going to suggest that photojournalism was born in 1862 during the Civil War on the Virginia Peninsula. Because look, before the Civil War, they had maybe a picture of a barn fire, local events, a guy trapped at Niagara Falls, not really national events being covered by photographers. And even here, the first photos of really graves in the Civil War, this is taken on Henry Hill. This thing still fills with water to this day. The parking lot's over there at Bull Run. And here are not so fresh Confederate graves taken 8 months after the Battle of Bull Run. But as they move onto the Virginia Peninsula, photographers are following them. They get fresh graves on the battlefield. Here they have a field hospital. In 3D, you could see people ministering to the wounded. You could see all sorts of great details. We know these are men from the 16th New York who just got some of that style of sort of corncob straw hat up that way. And within 2 months of that, the photographers are getting closer. They're going to, for the first time, record, living carnage on a battlefield, if that's the right term. So dead horses on the Cedar Mountain battlefield, right near there also, they're securing photos of more fresh graves. But finally, September 1862, they've achieved their photographic coup when Alexander Gardner, working for Matthew Brady, recorded 20 photos, all in 3D, of the dead of Antietam. And man, imagine not only not knowing how horrible a battlefield could look, and you still can't get the smells, and you still can't get a lot of stuff, color, and things like that, but suddenly you think it's this glorious thing, and then you see this sad scene in 3D like this in a stereo viewer, and it shocked the nation. And like I said, there were newspaper reporters saying if Mr. Brady has not taken the bodies and dragged them to our doorsteps, he has done something very like it. And you would think then that people would see this stuff and say, we have to stop this war. And to be sure, some did. Okay, but others, including Abraham Lincoln, said no. We have to continue this struggle to make sure these dead didn't die in vain. So 20 photos at Antietam. And they are horrific. Again, imagine if this is your son. Okay, and this is why William Fresnito calls this the most disgusting of obscenities. That's what war is. Look, they're on both sides of the fences over here. This is not a glorious thing at all. The following month, there are 3 photos taken of dead Confederate soldiers piled up at Battery Robinette at Corinth, Mississippi. The only photos taken of dead in the West, and the only ones with identified soldier in the West as well, and that's a guy named Major Rogers, commander of the 2nd Texas. 1 photo taken at 2nd Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. So, here we are midway through the war, and there have been 24 taken. You know how hard it was? You needed a Union victory, first of all, because all the cameramen are Union cameramen at this point. So you needed a Union victory, something that didn't happen where all the cameramen were too often. They needed to be really close and get there right away before any of the dead were buried. So now we're at our 3rd place there at Chancellorsville, the Chancellorsville Campaign. 37 at Gettysburg, and 100% of the ones where we know they were taken at one of 2 places, Devil's Den or the Rose Farm. Okay, those are the only identified ones. 37, by far more than anywhere else. 8 more outside of Fredericksburg, where there were some burial operations. 6 at Petersburg on the Althoff farm as part of the fight of Harris Farm, and then 22 at Petersburg for a total of 97 photos of dead soldiers in the Civil War. If you wonder why I obsess over these things and look at the details and focus in on their threads and everything like that, it's because we only have 97. Any photo you've seen of a dead soldier in the Civil War, if they are actually dead, was taken at one of these 7 places, and it's one of those 97 photos. Every photo in Ken Burns, everyone in every book you've ever read, we have a very finite number. So I like to learn as much as I can about these guys, at least where they fell, even if not their names and their units. So when you come to Gettysburg, you see more than ever, here you have some around Devil's Den. Many of you know that this is the slaughter pen, and you can see dead soldiers sort of dotting the terrain all over the place here. Remember, 4 wounded for every dead soldier, so in this small area, imagine if you can see 6 dead bodies, imagine another 24 wounded here, and then some other people that we're not accounting for. In this little area, you'll wonder why they called it the slaughter pen, and you can line up all sorts of stuff here. In fact, this rock here might serve as the backdrop, yes, for this next photo. So this rock here is actually that rock there, and if you zoom in on this, you can see a tiny bit of this guy's uniform sticking up. Again, a photo called All Over Now. I mean, this guy had been bloated and drenched by recent showers and no doubt emitting odors of the most offensive nature. He'd been lying motionless in death for 4 days before Alexander Gardner and his crew came upon him and recorded this photo. If you go back there, you can still see this crack in that rock, every single bit. Some of the lichen is even on some of these rocks, but just an incredible amount of detail that you can really discover once you know where they're taken. And once you know where a photo is taken and when it was taken, suddenly that photo is no longer just something to highlight a book, but rather it is a primary document, perhaps better than any other, to teach us about at least that place and what happened there. A rarely seen photo of a dead Confederate soldier in the triangular field, also disputing forever for ghost people who believe that your photos won't come out in the triangular field. They were doing it right after the battle. You know, I'm sure they were carrying, maybe this is a field station or something. Someone slept there or was trying to protect themselves there behind this rock. You can still go here to this day. In one version of this, you can see the Timbers Farm, the elusive Timbers Farm. How many people have been there before? You know, not too many. Good, more than I figured, you know, in the background there. And after all the dead soldiers were kind of photographed, you know, they were being buried while the photos were taken. We have evidence of that. The photographers were obsessed with the 3D potential of Little Round Top, with the new fortifications built by the soldiers themselves right after the fighting was over. A lot of good it did them then. And this pine tree actually stood until like the 1980s. It was there for a while. And I remember seeing it. But they love the 3D potential of being able to show these walls. These rocks are still very much there today, and I'm sure many of you have seen them right below the 44th New York Castle. But Matthew Brady came along and got, again, the better atmospheric conditions and demonstrating his mastery of the art. You know, really shows the 3D with an assistant there. The rail above that is the Warren Rock on which now stands General Warren's statue, and a little bit of the field of Pickett's Charge, or at least the Union line where it was in repelling Pickett's Charge. Pretty cool stuff. And a photo like this, taken by Alexander Gardner, just looks like a horrible photo, and it's not the best even in 3D, but here it is in 2D. Let me show you what it looks like in 3D. Aha! That's what he was going for. Okay, he's showing that there's a curve in the wall, that it's all tangled, that there's rocks in the distance, and whatnot. Again, in 2D, it just looks like a big old mess. And it doesn't look that much better in here, but it's at least worth it. And by the way, you can see this boulder up there today, right below the 91st Pennsylvania. That's the tall, sort of single shaft up on Little Round Top. As you know, there's fighting after Little Round Top here in the wheat field, but we don't have any period photos, not even 1880s. Good 3D photos taken in the wheat field. This is the 17th Maine, right along the southern end of the wheat field. As you know, they fought on the Rose Farm next. Here's the guy I pointed out earlier with the bent knee. And just horrific fighting at the Rose Farm. And some of these guys got decimated by Union artillery at the peach orchard in the distance. Here is our earliest decent 3D photo of the peach orchard, actually, taken in the 1880s. I'm showing a winter shot of the peach trees up there. And of course, as you know, just a couple of horrific photos, two of which were taken in 3D at the Trossel buildings. This is the Trossel barn here. Many of you often have seen the artillery shell hole that was clearly in evidence on July 6th or 7th, 1863, when this was recorded. And some of the supposedly 80 horses that were killed from this one battery, Bigelow's battery. I mean, 80 sounds pretty high, but a battery did have more than that. Many horses, and if you want to capture the battery, shoot the horses if you can. And they at least temporarily captured a bunch of these cannons here. And I mean, this is unlike the soldiers. I mean, as sad as this is, you know, the men at least were buried. The horses, many of them too big to bury, so they gathered them together in big heaps and burned the carcasses either where they lay or into big heaps, and the fetid fog of foulness that casted over the battlefield was just an unbearable thing from miles and miles away. So, you know, the battlefield, you know, as much as some of us are obsessed with it, it's not a place you want to be in, you know, mid-July 1863. And yet the photographers, reporters, everybody, you know, just dealt with it. As I said before, the fighting also went over toward the Union right on East Cemetery Hill. Here, a very cool photo of the lunettes on East Cemetery Hill, and I'll point out that one of them faces south along the Baltimore Pike. You know, I'm not one who believes the cavalry is going to break through and get into the Union rear during Pickett's charge, but I'll tell you what, someone was concerned about it. We have a July 5th drawing that also shows a gun in a lunette here, so I tend to think there's probably a gun facing south in case the Confederates did outflank the Union line. Pretty cool stuff. Here, a cool thing showing through the evergreen cemetery. Cemeteries used to have just real for the yards keepers, pain in the rear, all sorts of wrought iron fencing, which was not easy for troop movements nor for lawnmowers having to take care of them. And most of these at most cemeteries are actually not there anymore for that reason. But this is the view that the men that Winfield Scott Hancock sent in reinforcements, the 2 brigades I mentioned earlier, actually came across this area and went on to East Cemetery Hill in the distance to actually wrestle the top of the hill back from the Confederates. And on Culp's Hill itself, you got to see 3D photos of this. Here are those breastworks. You know, and I kind of made fun of them being chin high, but if those guys stood up, it looks like they are actually chin high. So I totally retract what I was saying earlier, because you know what? They look really tall now that I compare them to them. And here it is. This is what the Union had, and this is how 1,300 Union soldiers were able to hold at bay and actually repel more like 3,000 to 4,000 Confederate soldiers attacking them in this area. There are numerous photos actually of the bullet-marked trees on Culp's Hill, and so bullet-marked were these, almost all these trees, this would be a field 20 years later, and you can document it through photos showing these trees just dying. And you can even zoom in and see artillery projectiles in some of these holes here. And you can also see Matthew Brady's assistant, who's playing dead but not very well. He doesn't even put his head all the way down. I mean, that's not even good. And you can see this guy with the puffy shirt in a bunch of other Brady photos and whatnot. So he doesn't count toward the 97 at all. And maybe the best one of all, Brady's assistant in the linen duster. Beautiful photo. How many of you have been to this rock before? The Confederate sharpshooter's boulder. All right. Looks like there's more nerds on this side of the room. I don't know why it worked out that way. And in the fighting, you know, for Culp's Hill, it continued into the next day where they fought for 7 hours. And here's a photo taken from right near the Baltimore Pike, looking toward Spangler Spring in the distance. So this is where all the Union reinforcements came in. This is where the Indiana and Massachusetts soldiers charged against the Confederates. And of course, they met for a time at night at Spangler Spring, but they didn't fraternize and hang out, you know, and forget their differences. Rather, it was so dark they didn't know the enemy was there, and they both drank water from the same spring, although it didn't look like this during the Civil War. This is the earliest type of photo we have of Spangler Spring, actually. And of course, that night, General Meade gathers his men for a council of war in the Leicester House. Incredibly, Meade and Lee ended up both occupying houses of widows during the Battle of Gettysburg. And of course, you know the story. Confederate shells from Pickett's charge are going to fly over here after Meade and his council decided to stay here, killing many horses and whatnot, but saving the lives of many Union soldiers, you know, who escaped the shells because they flew too far or exploded too late. This is the closest thing we have to a close-up photo of Pickett's charge. So if you look through these trees and weeds, that's the field of Pickett's charge, and so it is on this side of the Bryan House as well. Many of you know the Bryan House. It's right along Cemetery Ridge on the Union position. If only Matthew Brady would have said, hey, there's a clump of trees right over there, just like 90 degrees to the left, we would have a close-up photo of the angle at Pickett's charge. Just incredible. So we instead can do with this early 1880s photo showing the clump of trees. They'd already been growing, but there's no fence around it. There's no Hancock Avenue. There's no monuments yet. Just incredible to look at this photo. All you see is a few wagon tracks. And, you know, accessibility was a big deal. You know, you took your photo wagon where there were roads. And, you know, I don't see any roads here. I wanted to come up with a Back to the Future joke right there about needing roads or not, but it just didn't work. Of course, after the battle, this is just a horrific place to be, as I mentioned. And, you know, there is no FEMA in the Civil War. There aren't real insurance companies there's no CDC or anything like that. The functions end up taking place. There's a little warehouse in town a block south of the square, and the U.S. Sanitary Commission sets up there. David Wills, a block up, ends up becoming FEMA and the CDC. They go to his house to try to find their loved one and whatnot. And these little houses and operations are covering this event that you just can't even comprehend. Remember, 2 years earlier was the Battle of Bull Run. Okay, 4,500 casualties, by far the bloodiest battle in American history. Okay, bloodier than a lot of American wars before it in just one day. Okay, and then 2 years later, you have something more than 11-fold bloodier than that. How are you supposed to deal with that? Even if the trains are working and the lines aren't cut, who stockpiled that much, you know, medical supplies or anything? So nobody knew this was coming. Nobody could have been prepared for it. Here is Alfred Wode, or Wad, at Devil's Den. Many of you, I'm sure, have sat on this rock before. Again, he's one of those sketch artists recording these incredible drawings that we use to this day. They can show movement. They can show other immediate things that the camera just couldn't show. And if you go back there, you know, you can put your foot in the same crink in the rock. You can see the same crack right above his head right there if you sit there. It's just great. And many of you have probably also run up this rock with me before with different levels. And the battlefield is just a mess after that. Eventually, they're going to bury everyone on the battlefield, this sad scene. Most people were buried within a week or two, but as you know, many of them will be reinterred. The Confederates were buried in mass graves here on Culp's Hill, and you can still see those to this day. Most of them remained in the ground for about 8 years until we moved south through the efforts of Southern ladies groups, and they're going to end up in Hollywood Cemetery and in other cemeteries in the Carolinas and Virginia, mostly as unidentified piles of bones at that point. The National Cemetery, of course, dedicated in 1863 in November when Lincoln came to give the address. This one taken after the Minnesota urn, the first monument erected in full on the battlefield except the Soldiers' National Monument. And you can see, look at the depth of these things. They hadn't been there that long. They hadn't really sodded them up yet. And people are starting to see the battlefield. Gettysburg's first historian, John Badger Batchelder, is leading people. This is right at the Little Round Top parking lot. You can find these rocks to this day. And they went on and on as they aged around the battlefield. And again, they were like us. They're in 3D, just like we are. I mean, they weren't flat people. The first monuments on the battlefield themselves started appearing in 1878. This is the monument to Fred Taylor, the same month as another one to Strong Vincent on Little Round Top. This one was later enlarged and moved to a different spot further forward. And eventually, almost every Union unit would have some sort of a monument, a marker, or a tablet, including this one to the 4th New York Light Artillery, James E. Smith commanding. That might be Smith sitting there. But again, they're meeting with some of the men who captured the battery. Probably both Georgians and Texans were two of the people that captured 3 of his guns, 3 of the 7 guns lost at Gettysburg. And ultimately, some monuments would actually go and mark their company positions and everything, and you know how dotted Gettysburg is now, but this is the park the veterans made. There was an observation tower on East Cemetery Hill for a while. You can see it was 40 feet tall, and look, this is the giant 90-foot poplar that was up there. It had been struck by lightning twice, still didn't fall, and eventually died not long after this. This is taken in about 1892 or something like that. Could be 1878, but I don't think so. Eventually, there will be larger towers erected on the battlefield, 60 feet, 70 feet high. This one, right on top of Cemetery Hill, where they're doing restoration, and where the cyclorama building was later put in and then removed. So that tower was right next to this building, and this is already getting old now. It's been 3+ years since the cyclorama came down, very happily, in my opinion. And then the veterans started getting older, of course, but they had built this park that you can so well see to this day. Hancock Avenue, compared to that other one I showed you, the clump of trees, had come quite a long way in the 20-some years since I'd sent you that, or showed you that other picture. And of course, the photos, the stereo photos live on. Sometimes we don't even know about the 3D photos because they didn't come out as well. Here's a little-known variant of the dead sharpshooter at Devil's Den. You usually don't see this version. You can see the blanket on which they probably carried him there in the first place, the pool of water, Little Round Top in the background. But again, not good atmospheric conditions for this particular one. But it does, you know, set a precedent. That wall was photographed in 1867 by the Tyson brothers, in 1906 by the Keystone brothers, and of course, you know what to do. You got to get there. And on my first trip, you know, I don't like to tell anybody how to interact with the battlefield. I've seen people get mad, sad, happy, gleeful, playful, and uncaring. Every range of emotion. But for me, the first time I came, there was never a doubt what I was going to do when I first got there. I mean, it was just, you know, I wanted to experience what that soldier experienced. You know, I still do this stuff to this day. That's not for everybody. But not only did I want to do it on my first trip, but I had to do it on my second trip, and my third trip, and my fourth trip. And you can actually see me aging. You know, eventually then I became a licensed battlefield guide. These are all in the 80s and early 90s. But then I became a guide, and people started saying, lay down there. And I have probably 150 pictures of me slowly getting older there. And then, of course, you know, again, I'm not even punishing you with that many. I bring my kids there. He's 6 weeks old there, so I kind of waited until he was the right age. But I got both my kids at that spot, too. But, you know, however it works, you know, and you can see it in 3D to this day, I encourage anybody to legally engage with the battlefield in any way they'd like. There are no specific rules for what's okay. We know what's wrong. We know you're supposed to dig stuff up and, you know, and explode things and whatnot. But other than that, you know, I want to give you license to do so. He certainly would have agreed. FDR, when he is here at the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, 1938, I think, you know, There were something like 2,000 Union and Confederate veterans came to this thing. Their average age was 94, which is really old, especially back then. 75th anniversary. It was a big deal. 200,000 people were supposedly in town for the event. And here it is, the last reunion of the blue and gray, and you're seeing it in 3D. And not only are you seeing it in 3D, you know, when I look at a photo like this, you can see the peace light in the background right after they had unveiled it, some of the veterans up there. This is a film camera. Civil War veterans are seeing a film camera. There are planes flying overhead, okay? And you know what? The planes had been around for 40 years or 30 years already at that point, okay? It wasn't even that new. There are tanks rolling around Gettysburg for this event. Civil War soldiers. And I like to think about this, you know, to think about, well, you know, these guys were around, and I missed by a decade, you know, meeting any Civil War veterans. Even if I'd have gotten to meet the last one, you know, as a baby, I would have missed it. But you know what? I've met a couple of hundred people and shaken the hands of them who knew Civil War veterans and shook the hands of Civil War veterans. And you can go back to the places where they were. And I just, you know, I've been to coming up on 1/5, more than 1/6 of the Gettysburg anniversaries. It just wasn't that long ago. I'll bet you some of you in this room could have met Civil War veterans. And in that way, my goal, my job with the Civil War Trust and as a battlefield guide is to kind of shrink that time, that 155 years since the Civil War, you know, so that it just doesn't seem like that long ago, because my #1 lesson in learning about the Civil War is that, you know, we are just like they are. We like to think our lives are so complicated, which they probably got more, I don't know if useful, but more things going on in their lives. But in essentials, the things they wrote home about, the things they cared about, the essential things they had to deal with, we are just like them. And I guess that's my maybe not so profound lesson about the Civil War that I hope you'll take home. And of course, after they were all gone, you know, Vietnam, Korea, and other fighting and urban sprawl did not spell, you know, happy times for battlefields. I mean, that's Franklin, although that's coming back a little bit. But luckily in the 80s, you know, modern, you know, interest in the Civil War at the 125th really came back. People started going to reenactments, paying attention and whatnot. And that's when the modern battlefield preservation movement was born. And I'm going to end with some stuff that the Trust has done that you all, even if you're not a member of the Civil War Trust, just by being here today, by being interested in the Civil War, you're going to perpetuate the memory and have more people involved. And that's why when Glendale looked like this in 1987, by the way, let me show you the preserved land, the 1 acre at Glendale that was preserved around the cemetery. Here it is today. Okay, so I mean, I'd say we did pretty well there. Malvern Hill, 40 acres had been preserved, and this is 1987. Today it looks like that. Okay, and we have numerous examples of where this is happening. We just connected the Wilderness Battlefield with the Chancellorsville Battlefield. We're getting there where you can actually walk from one to the other. We've actually just about finished raising funds on that. Champion Hill, Mississippi, we're connecting the two big parts, and we've even since got more down here. And just remember, 30 acres are lost every day. We're drinking from a fire hose. We're going to lose more than we're going to get, but we hope to get the important stuff while we can. At Perryville, we're just about done. We've saved almost the entire battlefield with this last acquisition right here. Brandy Station, Virginia. And it's not only that you can save the land, none was preserved in 1987. Here's what's preserved now. Okay? And when you preserve stuff like this, you can take a house like that and get rid of it on top of Fleetwood Hill. Okay? So that instead of seeing, you know, that up top, you're seeing what you saw closer to during the Civil War. We finally bought the center of the Antietam battlefield. And when we bought it, we, you know, we tore that barn down. We got our people together and said, hey, this is really important. Our members, the greatest in the world, came together, gave us money, tore the barn down, tore down the line of trees, and for the first time in 90 years, you can see the Dunker Church from the cornfield now. Soon we'll replant the East Woods over here and take down the last house as well. Now, all these photos I've been showing you ended up in attics and whatnot. This is Matthew Brady's nephew's house. Each one of these little sleeves is a precious glass plate Civil War negative, mostly portraits. This is the National Archives collection now. The Library of Congress has the lion's share. I hope many of you are using that. Here are some of the actual glass plates, witness glass. I mean, this plate was held by Matthew Brady's men and in front of Robert E. Lee. I mean, his visage is burned into this. And man, if you ever get the chance to see this stuff close up, I know a few of us in the room got to. Here's the dead sharpshooter, the original negative of the dead sharpshooter. Check it out. Go to loc.gov and download these things. Just type in your favorite thing if you're into Vicksburg. See what they got, download the high resolution, zoom in, and you'll never regret it. And if you want to see 3D photos, keep your glasses if you'd like. Go to Civil War Trust, and we have lots of 3D photos on there. So does the Center for Civil War Photography, civilwarphotography.org. Of course, there's a shoddy book for sale over there if you want to. If anyone's interested, you know, I got some other stuff over there. No pressure at all. But if you are a real Civil War photography nerd, talk to me afterward. I run a Civil War photography photo seminar once a year, and it's in Gettysburg this year, and it is. We really go in depth for 3 days about the photography. I thought I was done, but I wanted to talk about a couple of mysteries before we close. There are some photo mysteries. We don't know where any of them are. Here's a photo of the 50th Pennsylvania. There's another photo taken in 1865 of this same unit. Now, these mysteries are fun. Everybody searches for them, but unfortunately, some people go out and say, hey, I found it, and I'm certain of it, and there's nothing you can tell me that I'm wrong. Well, here's one recently. It just came up. So a guy named Dustin Heisey went and supposedly found this location. I've been looking for it for, I thought it was 14, but it's actually more like 20 years. I've been looking for this distinctive pattern. So he went out there and found it right from his car. And, says, well, there's a stone wall here, and there's a stone wall there, and, well, the land kind of goes like that, and there's some trees, and there's some land like that, and there's some trees. He even put up a tent there and put a person there to try to show, hey, they're the same size. Now, for my part, you're clearly high up in this photo and you're not there. There's not enough room here for all these people to stand. He disagrees on it, but what I said is, okay, well, maybe you're right. Let me, though, note that in the background of this photo right there are some very distinctive boulders. There's no good reason why those shouldn't be there. And of course, they're not. So if you've got something that doesn't look quite right, and then it just doesn't line up, and you have to start saying, well, they destroyed the rocks, ha-ha, just to mess me up, you're probably in the wrong spot. At the same time, these same soldiers were photographed with the hero of Gettysburg, John Burns. And if you could find the John Burns area, there's a rock right here. So maybe we could actually line up where this photo was taken. Pretty cool stuff. And if you're a big enough loser, and this is when I had a lot of time on my hands, you would actually take the John Burns photo and connect people. By the way, this is when PageMaker first came out. You know how hard it was to use these things back then? I don't know if there's any graphic designers here, but this was a real pain in the rear, so I like to show it to people. And of course, the greatest photo mystery of all, the harvest of death. And Gettysburg Daily is with us today, and it has been missing for a while, but Gettysburg Daily is back. And the last Gettysburg Daily posts in 2012 were actually about the harvest of death, and we have filmed several new videos to talk about updates of the harvest of death. No, we don't know where it is. And all the other proposed sites are wrong, so sorry to spoil the end for you. But you have this incredible photo of Union soldiers. That's rare. Very few of the 97 are actually taken of Union soldiers from two different directions. You could look at them in 3D. You could look at them in more expansive versions here. You could look at them in a colorized version if you think that would help you. Anything we got to do to get closer to it. I hope we find this thing someday, but nothing has really been advanced that'll help. I'll tell you this. This was when I thought I'd found it, and I started saying, aha, there was a wall here, there's some stones there, this works well, I know who these guys are, and look at all these notes. It looks like, if you ever saw that movie, A Beautiful Mind, where the guy's going crazy, I mean, this is how all of us are who search for these things. But if you have to start to do this, you're in the wrong spot. Okay, if it sounds like a conspiracy theory, and this is my stuff, so I'm making fun of myself here, it means your spot is wrong if you need to start justifying it. So, and then you'll start looking like this, as a matter of fact. That's really how I equate the crazy mystery harvest of death people, but it's still fun, and I'm still one of them. And there's all sorts of good stuff. I mean, imagine if these kids really were from the Civil War. Thank you so much for listening. That was all one sentence. I appreciate it.